Hi everyone, delonewolf here and welcome back to EVE Talk, your weekly look at the market in EVE Online. As always, we'll try to start with a little bit of news, but at the moment there is not a lot of news coming out when it comes to the development for EVE Online. Must of course be said that the next 2 weeks are bound to be pretty low on information. It is the holidays, it is Christmas, it is New Year, and just like any other company, those tend to be 2 weeks where a lot of people take time off. Historically, where I work, it's the same thing. I myself am going to work these 2 weeks. I tend to not really mind that too much because when everyone else is on holiday, that usually gives you a chance to catch up on your own work. But not a lot of news. We did get the economic numbers for November. Now, I didn't dive too deeply into those myself just yet. I did take a quick look at the thread on Reddit and I watched Talking in Stations covering this in a pretty long video. I haven't watched all of it, but it's definitely pretty interesting. So if you want to, have a nice discussion to listen to about the economic numbers, you can definitely go to Talking in Stations. And they have perspectives, the perspectives of players from Nulsic and things like that. What can be mentioned there, of course, Ratting is taking a really big nosedive because of the ESS and the dynamic bounty system. And once again, something that we haven't seen since Blackout is that incursions actually bring more ISK into the game than Nulsic Ratting, or Ratting in general, which is of course something that's pretty damn unusual. It's a pretty big hit to the money supply. There's still more ISK flowing into the game than being taken out of the game through faucets, but it is definitely something that has a pretty big impact on the economy in general. So we'll try to look at EVE Talk through that lens a little bit for today, and that's really it. So we can then also move on and take a quick look at the New Eden store. Let's take a look at that. So of course, Yule Star Skin, they're pretty damn good looking, and they've got this countdown to like next year, so something for you to consider. And I will take a quick look at the services where we have no special sales going on, so nothing all too special. All right, let's move on to the market then, and we are going to start with some plex and stuff coming in at 2:30. Like that, and here we go. Here is the plex prices. So 2.8 million for the sellers of plex in GTA 4.4, 2.65 million for the buyers. That is definitely down a little bit from last week, and you can see here that we have this slight downward slope that was happening throughout most of the month of December. Not a very visible slope, but there's definitely a little bit of pressure on the price here, and right at the tail end here, we do have a little bit of a jump back up for plex itself. So let's take a look at the player-owned trade hubs going down to just below 2.8 million ISK. So the sellers not really moving. It is the buyers that apparently are moving down, 2.65, and 2.65 million as well for the buyers in the Tranquility Trading Tower in Perimeter as the best buyer. So a little bit of a gap opening up between sellers and buyers. And if we try to look at this through the lens of ISK amounts not really dropping, but the amount of new ISK coming into the game dropping, that's putting pressure on inflationary expectations. I would say people are not expecting prices to just go up massively in a matter of months, because the ISK just doesn't flow into the game as quickly anymore. And I think what this also really showed in the November numbers is that ISK velocity is dropping substantially. So there's less trading happening, less ISK flowing from one wallet to the next at a much lower velocity. And so what I would say this is starting to create, this current environment is a feeling of I need to actually save my ISK. I need to keep it in my wallet so that I've got this powder dry. At the moment, there's not really a lot of stuff to invest in because we can't expect prices to really go up massively, right? When you're in this, you could call it crazy time, but in this time when there's lots of ISK being created, so lots of opportunity for you to make a lot of ISK and to invest in the economy. But then there's also lots of stuff being produced. That of course is the perfect place for players to decide, should I get more ISK? Should I sell stuff, or should I expect certain items to go up in value massively? Right, could be inflation, could be meta, could be all sorts of stuff, and so that dynamic just is not here as much anymore, and people are basically, being a lot more careful with their ISK, and as a result, what we don't have here is this big inflationary cycle that tends to have always happened in Plex, and at the moment it seems to be very muted. We do have the increase from the summer, right, 2.5 million to 2.75 million after the summer fall, and here a little bit of a pullback, so this could really be the war that has created a bit of a spike, if you want to call it that, or a plateau here at 2.7 million, and now at the tail end we may actually be seeing slightly lower activity as the war has, in my opinion, died down a little bit. There is also this phase that players are probably waiting for January to basically force the hand of some alliances when it comes to their structures, so we're in a little bit of a lull, and so we've got a little bit of pressure on the price of Plex, with sellers still at almost 2.8 million, but it's the buyers that are dropping out. No one is, or fewer people are willing to say, I'm gonna definitely invest in Plex because that's definitely going to go up in price. In today's circumstances, I've been saying that over the last couple of weeks, uncertainty is definitely up a little bit. Next up, we have the multiple pilot train certificates bill. A little bit of a move here due to these volumes, which was of course a Plex sale that was happening, but we are going back down a little bit. And again, the lack of buyers is pretty obvious. 1.24 billion for the buyers and 1.35 billion for the sellers. Definitely more sellers than buyers at the moment. Then we have the skill extractors, very same chart as Plex, except we don't have the slight bump up at the tail end here, and what we're seeing here, 310 million for the sellers, 301 million for the buyers. That is still a pretty narrow margin for something that costs 300 million. Perhaps this is still the one place where we have some demand, but look out, because in just a matter of 5 buy orders we do go down to 294 and then to 10 very quickly. So again, there is some strong demand, some competition in the skill extractors, but this could dry up decently quickly. Next up, we have the impact on the skill injectors. Here are the large skill injectors staying pretty low at 650 million. ISK actually made an investment of that. I'm not sure if I still have it here in my holdings because I did switch PCs. Yeah, I don't have it here. I think I bought it over here somewhere, so probably just below the 700 million mark. Turns out to be a little bit of a mistake, and yeah, you just don't know in this day and age in EVE Online what's going to happen next. 655 million for the sellers, 621 for the buyers, and again those buyers 621, 619, 570, and then down to 71 million. That's in Cheetah itself. There's gonna be more competition, of course, in the Tranquility Trading Tower, so it's not exactly the same picture, but I would say that there is definitely a little bit more selling than buying happening at the moment. After that, we have the small skill injectors. Let's start with the chart. Also basically flattening out above 130 million ISK at a pretty low point. 131 for the sellers, 124 for the buyers, and again in Jita, buyers dropping off very quickly, and then the Tranquility Trading Tower and some other player-owned trade hubs are picking up the slack, but look at that, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, just a couple dozen, filled buy orders, a couple dozen small skill injectors can drop the buy prices very, very quickly. After that, we still have our daily alpha injectors. Here we do see buyers dropping off, and so we're finally seeing a little bit of a move downward, some pressure showing even in the 5-day moving average. Sellers are still at 47.5 million ISK though, buyers at 35.5, no, just above 35 million. And actually here, Perimeter Tranquility Trading Tower starting to take over the trade here at almost 39 million, closing the gap quite substantially. Still not a huge amount of demand through these buy orders, so investors, I would say, are definitely getting to be quite careful when it comes to investing in daily alpha injectors, but the sellers can still demand a very high price, and I would say that, yeah, this is definitely something that's happening at the moment as well. Alpha clone activity is quite high in EVE Online. caught a decent part of the fireside chat with CCP Hailmar, CCP Burger as well. And yeah, lots and lots of players are trying EVE Online at the moment, giving it a go, actually sticking around for a longer time. And I think that this is translating in these much higher daily alpha injector prices, because this is a goal that they can set for themselves. 50 million ISK, that's definitely doable. There is still strong demand, and there is in fact this type of demand that doesn't have the investor patience, that longer horizon. This is the players that are playing EVE Online. They earned 50 million ISK and they're saying, all right, I'm off to Cheetah, I'm buying one of these daily alpha injectors, I'm boosting my character, and I'm going back out there doing stuff again, and they're willing to pay that pretty big premium just to get that injector boost right now, which I think makes a lot of sense, right? These newer players tend to need to still find their hook into EVE Online, and so the daily alpha injectors may actually just be a pretty successful hook actually, which was a little bit of a worry by players when this was first introduced, because again, the pay to win aspect is always very dangerous, I would say, in a game like EVE Online. But for the daily alpha injectors, it looks actually like it's working out quite well, and that this is potentially a very strong hook for these alpha players that are trying EVE Online out. After that, we have the hypercore still to take a look at it, so you can again see a slight indication of decreased activity in the game. We're definitely well below 300,000 ISK for the average price, 286,000 for the sellers, 230 for the buyers. And again, you know, you could see this as trade moving towards the Tranquility Trading Tower. I think for the entire plex stuff category, there is a little bit of that in there, but the numbers are also down. I would say there is this, yeah, maybe this deflationary fear that players are having, or at least this much lower expectation of inflation in the game, considering what's happened to the ISK being created through ratting. Interesting times for sure. Let's take a look at the impact on the minerals then, coming in at 1145. Like that, and you may already have seen it from the ticker, but yeah, titanium going back down. In Jita itself being sold for 680 at the moment, buyers coming in at 651. This is a very different picture, I would say, right? Compared to a lot of that plex stuff. There is still quite strong competition to buy up minerals, to try and grab them. 650, 641. But then if we go to, well, actually Tranquility Trading Tower again, and look at that, decent volumes as well. So I think here we may move with this filter on. Off, I should say, so we can also take a look at the player on trade-ups, because they're going up to 660 with 267 million units as well. So definitely a slight change that may just be consolidating because of everything that's happening in EVE Online, but a much more sizable part of trade may just be moving to player-owned trade hubs. Very risky stuff in a sense as well, because of course if a war were to happen and this would go into low power, anything that's in there could be at risk. So be very careful when it comes to that, but certainly an interesting trend to be spotted here in titanium. And so you can see here that we try to go back above 7 ISK, but then we are going back down. I would say the same thing right here. That this is a balancing act that CCP did plan for ahead of time. Sure, they did expect these big booms when it comes to the resource distribution, but they had this change to the bounty payouts as well, to basically make sure that we don't get crazy inflation numbers, hyperinflation you could say, in Tech 1 stuff either. And yeah, this just it's harder, of course, but I would say that missions, for instance, have gone up in value compared to ratting, compared to the general ISK flow, and as a result, you know, for newer players, it's gonna be harder, it's more expensive to create your first Tech 1 battleship and things like that. I would say that also makes it more rewarding, but right now also your high-sec activities that generate ISK are probably more valuable, at least in the last month or so as well, and that is being reflected in these prices for titanium, for instance, not going straight to the moon despite all of the changes. For pyrite, we're still on the uptrend, but you can see that we are slowing down here, and we managed to get above 20 though. which is pretty impressive. 21.67 for the sellers, 19.74 for the buyers. They're still trying to buy below 20 ISK. How long will that last? Very difficult to say, but pretty impressive chart, of course, for Pyrite, especially when you look at the start of the year at 5 ISK. This is a quadruple the price at the moment, so above 20 ISK. Very good price for Pyrite, of course, something to mine for in HiSec. Keep one thing in mind, historically speaking, before the resource bonanza period, you could say this was a decently normal price for Pyrite as well. After that we get Mexalon, that's a little bit flatter but at a very high price, 120 ISK. I would say 75, 80 ISK historically speaking already a good price for Mexalon. So here we're talking 122 for the sellers, 117 for the buyers. Pretty narrow margin, again showing decently strong demand here. People are willing to put down ISK and to invest that into minerals. Makes sense if you look at this 1 year chart, of course, and yeah, if you expect deflation in other stuff like Take-Two and things like that, this may just be the part where players are you know, pouring some of their wealth into, expecting that this may just keep going up in value in the first place. So Mexalon still very expensive. For HiSec, quite obvious, mine for Mexalon, mine for Pyrite. Tritanium is still pretty damn good, but it is not completely outlandish. After that we have our Isogen chart, and this is a counter to my expectation, but we are back down a little bit, below 40 ISK on average, 39.84 for the sellers and 36.50 for the buyers. We still have one big seller here of 46 million units at 40, that is probably keeping things in check a little bit. I am going to quickly mention this here again. Look at the volumes for Mexalon, 5 million, 7 million, 20 million, 11 million. That's it. Isogen, which should have lower amounts per cubic meters, still has that 46 million units here, 25, 10, 17 on some of these older orders. It's still it's a theory, right? Don't take everything that I say as gospel. Definitely do your own research, but I would say that there are still Isogen stocks being dumped out there, and that, for instance, the Isogen versus the Mexalon market still has a ways to go before both of them reach the same point that Mexalon is at the moment. I would say here we are talking fresh supplies needed for current consumption. Here in Isogen there is still, I think, a buffer from old Isogen that players have accumulated throughout the years of plenty. After that we have the Noxium chart bouncing nicely off of the 1000 ISK and going back up into the very nice value range, 1123 for the sellers, above 1000 ISK for the buyers. You know, a trip to low sec may just be pretty interesting. Of course, the current filaments, you know, are potentially really interesting as well. In fact, I saw during the fireside chat something that was requested, you could say, of CCP, right? We already have null-sec filaments for small fleets for engagement and things like that. They would say do the same for low-sec. It could be interesting. Now, I do think that perhaps introducing risk of, you know, fleets showing up across the entirety of null and low sec all of a sudden is just going to increase risk a little bit too much there. They need perhaps some counter measures or things like that against these filaments as well. But for now, I must also say, for the winter event, I feel like this is quite fitting and quite fun as well. So you could just grab a filament, jump into low sec, do a couple of data sites, go back out, but you would always find yourself in one of these winter storms, of course. So there would always be other players, potential conflict and things like that. If you would just have generic ones, boom, here you go into low sec, no one here. That's a very likely outcome all of a sudden. So perhaps this is they're touching on something that's pretty interesting, of course, where you actually have like a storm happening in a number of systems, and that's where all the filaments would be jumping into. It would basically increase the risk of the users of the filaments and increase conflict as well, while local residents that are outside of the storm could still do their own thing within their own space a little bit more. So perhaps it's something that CCP will look into later down the line. I think it's pretty damn interesting. So Noxium doing pretty well. Historically speaking, this is a pretty great price, and yeah, if you want to risk a lowsec or nullsec trip to try and grab some Noxium and yeah, not some Isogen just yet, but Noxium could be something to focus on, and it's definitely providing you some nice ISK, also over quadruple the price since the start of the year. After that, we've got our nullsec minerals. Here is Zydrine making its way back above 1250 as well. Almost 1300 for the sellers, 1258 for the buyers. Quite expensive, doing quite well here. And coming from nullsec, you need to basically import Zydrine at the moment. And so the sellers are dictating this price. And then we've got Megasite that's actually slightly trending up as well. My expectation is that Megasite could catch up to Zydrine, because historically speaking, Megasite has actually been more expensive than Zydrine. 660 for the sellers, 623 for the buyers. And what I'm not seeing here anymore is 50, 100 million units of Megasite. You can see a lot of the orders are going down into the hundreds of thousands and even tens of thousands of units. So I think that here this dynamic may slowly start to rear its head, and I do expect Megasite to go up a little bit. In general, very interesting, of course. If we then finally move to Morphite, that's flat above 50,000 ISK, 53,000 for the sellers, 50,000 for the buyers. That's crazy. When just a couple of months ago, here in September, we could have bought Morphite for less than 10,000 ISK. That's quite a trade to be made. And yeah, showing one thing, of course, is that minerals are still really attracting a lot of the ISK. And at the moment, what could start to happen, of course, is that some of that ISK is also starting to see these as a bit of a nest egg. They'd rather invest in minerals than plex, for instance, because they've seen what traders have seen what minerals have been doing over the last year or so, and of course this imbalance still needs to find its balance point itself, and that could take some time, and it could end up being higher. So that's probably the gamble that these traders are taking, because historically speaking, of course, plex has been your hedge against inflation, considered a little bit of being the gold of EVE Online. But yeah, for now, actual minerals seem to, or actual virtual minerals seem to have taken up that role because of their massive increase in value over the last couple of months, a year for some of the others. It's pretty impressive to see. After that, we have the PI segment coming in at 2150. There we go, and then there is our, I would say at the moment, our major casualty of both the lowering of the amount of ISK available through the dynamic bounty system, everything that happened basically in the last month or so. That's probably going to just have cemented the situation for PI, but also CCP has said we want activity in the game to have value. We want players to focus on that when it comes to ISK and value itself, and of course PI is like pretty much the most passive thing you can do in the game, and so this one has really been taking quite some severe hits. Here, for instance, broadcast notes after October, a serious downwards spiral from 2 million down to 1 million ISK, a bit above 1 million for the sellers, 900,000 for the buyers, and it's a lack of demand. It's perhaps also, you know, that psychology. It's also hit in all likeliness by the cores for the structures. So structures are a major source of consumption of advanced PI materials. That is down. Players are less willing to risk putting up new structures. There's also, of course, just the fallout of the situation. nullsec has been pushing into highsec as well, cleaning up the TAL, for instance. They don't want neutrals, they don't want free ports in there, they want to control all of that stuff as well. And so yeah, for newer players, for smaller groups, there's much less of an incentive to put out structures, and so all of that is creating the perfect storm for lower prices for broadcast nodes, having the price in like less than 3 months. That is of course quite impressive. And be very careful, don't catch a falling knife in this situation. You can see here that we have some volume spikes and some bumps happening at those price ranges, right? 1.5 million. Some investors jumped in. Nope, big mistake. 1.25 million right here. Everything below that was picked up by some traders. Nope, another mistake. We're now at 1 million and we could be going even lower. It's very difficult to say at the moment. Construction blocks also back down to a 1 year low range below 7,500. 8,000 for the sellers, 7,200 for the buyers. And to get this on the chart right here, well, you need to see a lot of dumping happening straight to these buyers, and that is going to put more and more pressure on these prices as well. And in fact, here consumer electronics moving to another 1 year low point. So here again, big step down to 7.5, defended for a little bit, down to 6,250, defended for a little bit, and now we're in danger of breaking that. 6,900 for the sellers, 6,200 for the buyers. So and again, to get this price in the last couple of days, it's mostly these guys that are actually dominating the trades. After that, we've got coolants slowly making its way back up to 7,500. On average, 7.8 for the sellers, 7,100 for the buyers. Again, much closer to this price range. So it's a little bit of a slight correction, you could say, after reaching a really low average price right here, 6,500 disc. That's of course very, very low. But here you also have this trend happening since the start of the year, right? We lost pretty much half the value as well, but since the start of the year. So this is a much lower and slower slope than coolants that actually also started at an amazingly good price. For coolants than the year before that, or half the year before that, I would say, we had an amazing time for PI related to fuels like coolants. Next up here, we've got our cryoprotectant solutions. I would say our exception still holds up here, still pulling up well above 100,000 disc. 110 for the sellers, 103 for the buyers. So when it's tied to implants, that's the one PI segment that still seems to have decently strong demand and can still ask for reasonable prices, you could say, compared to the pullbacks in most of the others. Here is enriched uranium, really also dove down well below 7.5. That was a little bit too much. So again, we have investors jumping in with a big volume spike, pushing the price back above 7,500. 8.5 for the sellers, 8.2 for the buyers. I mean, enriched uranium is not that easy to produce. It's not on that many planets that you can just go out, put down your PI and produce enriched uranium. So as a result, this should command a premium over coolants, but be very careful. We've seen this pattern before, of course, and we've seen continued steps down across the board quite often. So I would say that this is a pretty massive investment, but I'm not sure if it's going to pay off. Certainly in the short term, I don't expect a lot of it to be made there. Integrity response drones just confirming that advanced PI materials having extra trouble, I think because of everything happening with structures. Also heading down to 1 million discs, started the year at 2.5 million, you could say. 1.3 for the sellers, 1.1 for the buyers. That's probably less than half the price here. Mechanical parts, also an investment bounce, very interesting. So some people are making their first PI moves here. I would say for me personally, that's a little bit too early. And of course, what I'm actually doing is stockpiling stuff, right? I'm just not selling my PI, just like I'm not really investing too much ISK into the market either. So that risk averseness is definitely something that I'm experiencing at the moment. I'm very happy with the ISK that I have, and I don't want to risk it on trades that may lose a lot of value. And when it comes to PI, I'm not going to invest in there, but I am going to be able to increase my holdings just because of what I'm producing. For instance, I do produce mechanical parts. So these went down well below 7,000 discs. They're back at 7.6 for the sellers, but still 6.3 for the buyers. So here again, we have an investment move that pushed the price back up substantially. From a 1 year low point, but will this pay off? Again, I don't expect it in the short term. We'll see though. After that, we've got nanites. Again, nice little bubble here, March, April, May, you could say, or increased price here. So that's tied to implants, and so we're going back up above 5,000 disc. Very impressive. 5.5 for the sellers, 4.1 for the buyers. Again, the demand just isn't there, but considering this 1 year chart to almost any of the others, this is of course a pretty good maintenance of the price range. 5,000 at the start, 5,000 at the end. This is a new implant coming in, so overall yeah, this is another one that has been able to maintain its value. Unlike, for instance, Nano Factory started at $1 million, nice spike up to 175, and now is settling at around 750,000. Is a little bit of volumes increasing here as well. Maybe some buying. 800 for the sellers, 700,000 for the buyers. Narrower margin as well. It must be said, of course, that a lot of these others went from 2 million down to 1 million. So here, perhaps this is the reason why we've got a little bit of a stronger push in the last month or so, because it may feel like there's this less pressure that's going to happen here in Nano Factories when all of these others are diving down to 1 million ISK. Organic mortar applicators, that's a different story though, and so this should really, tell you to be careful when it comes to Nano Factories. That's still holding on to 750. Organic mortar applicator started here at 1 million ISK and is now down to 650 for the sellers, 635 for the buyers. Very pronounced 1 year low point. Recursive computing module starts at 1.5 to 175 million. Again, 1 year low point, half the price to 950,000 for the sellers, 822 for the buyers. And then we've got robotics. This is a real surprise to me. Specialized PI material tied to fuels, you would think there is some consumption, but here also losing a third of the price. Starts at 90k, which was already pretty low. Normally I would say 100,000 ISK for robotics, and now we're at 62 for the sellers, 61 for the buyers. So we're finding potentially a bottom here with some buyers willing to go above 60,000 ISK, but this is of course a pretty damn low price point for something that should actually see a decent amount of consumption still. Self-harmonizing power cores, also from 2 million to 1 million, very same story. And here again, you've got this little bump here when we reach 125, back up to 150. And here again at 125, trying to be defended. Some increased volumes. Nope, big mistake. We got a falling knife here. We're now moving down to 1 million ISK. Sterile conduits, a little bit of a bump here at the tail end from 750,000 ISK. So it's at 930 now, 863 now. Yeah, a little bit of a bump. We'll see if at some point, of course, someone is going to call the bottom correctly. It's just I couldn't tell you when that's going to happen. Yukomi superconductors here, February spike, so again tied to implants. Same story, starts at 50,000 ISK and is still selling now for 74,000, 64,000 for the buyers. So very nice, actually slightly increased value for Yukomi superconductors compared to the very start of the year. It's that one category of PI that's doing well. And finally we get with mainframes, another 1 year low point, 125 million. 1.4 for the sellers, 136 for the buyers. Okay, some buyers coming in here trying to snag some of those wetware mainframes. So some investors are taking their positions, but at the moment they're basically not able to turn the tide, you could say. The ISK just isn't plentiful enough, and so they're trading at really bottom ranges at the moment. All right, next up, advanced moon materials coming in at 3150. And the cluster shutdown should still have an hour. Yeah, we will be fine. I'm actually also doing a lot better in time all of a sudden. Let's get started here. Crystalline carbonate for Galente Productions, holding on to a 137 range. Interesting. 140 for the sellers, 140 for the buyers as well. Very narrow margin, so some demand picking up here apparently in crystalline carbonates. Okay, so the story that I've mostly been picking up on is that, well, since mining is next to impossible for regular minerals in Nosik, a lot has moved to moon mining there, which is causing plentiful supplies, which is then of course also causing quite some lower prices in Tech 2, but it's not a general crash. I actually made a video about that, and depending on the meta, you actually still have some chips and modules that are doing really well, that are commanding very good prices, and yeah, I would say we're not doing that badly when it comes to a crystalline carbonate. Able to still hold on to 140 ISK is really not that bad compared to, for instance, PI. After that, we have next carbide, which is 2.1, titanium carbide for Caldari production. Here we actually see tradable volatility, I would almost say. 180 down to 140, back up to 170, currently back down to 148 for the sellers, 142 for the buyers, and all of this happening above that Galente carbonite trade range. So very interesting, very weird to see this difference in behavior. Crystalline carbonite definitely a lot more stable, mostly at a slightly below average price here. Titanium carbide, lots of volatility, actually decently good spikes up to 180 and 170, and then actually down to 1 year low points here. You could have made some ISK on this little roller coaster in the last couple of months. After that, we've got Ferrite carbide for Minmatar. I would say again a different story, a little bit depressed with two big war spikes. So we know that some Minmatar Tech 2 ships are part of the Imperium main fleet doctrines, and so we did have some moves here, perhaps even some market moves to try and disrupt the Imperium, making it like very expensive, but then a little bit too much dumping, and so we constantly went down to 125 and even to the 120 range, I think here 113 in fact, 1 year low points, but now some investors are starting to take notice again, jumping back up here to 150. So at the moment we're talking 134 for the sellers, 117 for the first buyer, going down to 115 and 110 very, very quickly. So this is definitely one that is trading at super low ranges, but also has a little bit of that volatility, sometimes tied to the war. I don't think this tail end here is going to be tied to the war. So basically I would say this is the mirror image of Caldari that has volatility but going up to high ranges. And here for Minmatar, for Ferrite carbide, we've got some volatility, but then moving down to really very low ranges for this advanced moon material. And then we have our tungsten carbide for Amar. That's basically showing some depression in the last couple of months. That's much more in line with some of the PI materials. Moving down to the 138 for the sellers, 131 for the buyers. A bit more margin here as well, but definitely down from a stable period around 175. How does this translate to the meta materials? Here is 1.2 then, photonic meta materials for Galente. This one is showing this 1 year downwards pressure pretty clearly. Start above 15,000 ISK, is currently going for 11,800 ISK, buyers coming in at 11.4, so definitely some general pressure on this one, trading well below average. After that, we have our 2.2, where the hell are you? Non-linear metamaterials for Caldari. And again, a different story, although we see some pressure on the price. We start just above 20k, we're ending at 20k. Some volatility here and there. We do come from a 1 year low point at the moment, but definitely a different story here again. 20,000 for the sellers, 20,000 for the buyers. Super narrow margin compared to everything else here. And able to trade, sure, a little bit below average, but definitely on this chart I would say a respectable price still. Then we have our plasmonic metamaterials for Minmatar ships that has this late depression, managed to maintain 20,000 ISK for the first half of the year. War spiked right here in July, and then we started to move on the below average part, and at the tail end here on lower volumes, or well, maybe some investments here, we pushed back up, and that has then crashed the actual trade volumes. 18,700, that's actually really not bad, and 17,000 for the buyers. That's a much more dangerous margin, you could say, than for the Caldari one. But nice little comeback at the tail end then all of a sudden. So it's really a very mixed story here. Finally, we've got terahertz metamaterials that also managed to maintain its price range of 20,000 up until August, and then now it's losing its feathers in 2 steps and is actually going down substantially more. 14,000 for the sellers, compare that to the Minmatar one at 18,000, and then 14,000 for the buyers. Narrower margin right here again as well. So it's a different story here in these advanced moon materials tied to Tech 2 production. We've got stuff all over the place, so which actually is pretty damn interesting. It is also, I think confirming the story that sure, some Tech 2 stuff has gone down substantially in price and in value in the economy at the moment, but it's not across the board. It is not a general Tech 2 crash. There is strong demand in some ships, in some modules, some weapon systems, and that is creating this extra demand probably in some of these materials, and thus we have a very different story in the different categories. Now there is this other advanced move material stuff that does show this deflationary trend, or well, not really deflation, but you could say this fear that exists in the economy that yeah, there's just not a lot of inflation to be expected with all of the changes to the bounty system, and with minerals dominating the increased prices and thus the flow of ISK at the moment. That's much more in line with PI. So let's start here with fermion and condensates. We'll try to go through this decently quickly, but losing a third of the price, starts at 30,000 ISK and is now at a 1 year low point at 60,000, right? Buyers at 59.5, sellers at 63,350. To get this on the chart, you again need to see a decent amount of dumping to these buyers. After that, we've got the ferrogel, 40k to 30k, again losing a quarter of its price. After that, we've got our fullerite, starts at 1,000. This actually had a really good May and June, went up to 1,500 pretty easily, and is now in a much lower range, losing probably 40% of its price or something like that in the 600 range. Hypersynaptic fibers, 1 year low point from 11,000 down to 8,750 and below. Nano transistors, very interesting story actually. For nano transistors, we had this range for like the first, what is this, 6-8 months or something, where we were at 5,000 to 6,000 ISK for most of this period, and this was really when the markets were, there's not enough imports, we moved up to 6,000 ISK, then imports start to come back alive, or here we had enough imports, a little bit too much, we moved down to 5,000. This is where sellers and buyers met each other, and here sellers could dictate 6,000 ISK because there was not enough supply. Here again for this period, then back down, yeah, a little bit too much supply, but we managed to maintain this band, this range of 5,000 to 6,000 very easily. And then after the summer, yeah, that was broken, 4,000 ISK for a while, and now again we're moving down yet another step, 3,750 for the sellers, 3,600 for the buyers. So that's also that difference in story, right? You've got some of them that just have this 1 year downtrend, and some of the others where basically after the summer the economy said, oof, no, we're not gonna maintain this. All these others are so much under pressure that we're moving to lower ranges across the board. Phenolic composites starts at well above 2,000 ISK, starts well below 1,500 ISK, so probably another 40% or so down. Ceramic fiber starts well above 400, ends above 300, but the trend here is pretty obvious with a September spike, right? There is some activity here and there. But generally speaking, for these other advanced move materials, we have that pressure that is showing up. Next up, let's take a look at our Tech 2 ships coming in at 4120. Let's go and yeah, see if we can spot some opportunities. I must say that at the moment I'm very careful. I've got my holdings. If I find some good prices, I'll try to sell them, but I'm not really planning on making huge investments or anything like that in the Tech 2 ship market at the moment. Here is the Basilisk, you know, doing really well in the last couple of months, you could say, at around 230 million and above, but here at the tail end we are dropping off sharply. 204 for the sellers, 185 for the buyers, and if you try to get like a 185 to show up, that's gonna be down here somewhere, so that's definitely pretty low. The good news, you could say, is that this downwards pressure on the price should show increased supplies, and so last 24 hours have a page, but they're quite careful, right? It's not with massive volumes, but the more that you see this, the higher the chance that you actually are able to pick up a buy order at a good price. And so this is a good sign for people that are looking to invest in the Basilisk. I would say it's probably still a little bit too early. We're not massively oversupplied just yet, but that opportunity may just form if that trend of increased supplies keeps up. After that, we've got the Cerberus that is now unfortunately stalling its descent away from 200 million, away from that 1 year low point. We're talking 213 still for the sellers, 200 million for the first couple of first buyer, 195 for most. So actually quite a little bit of aggression, you could say, quite a bit of demand still in the Cerberus. Very good ship. This again could be that meta explanation. Honestly, if there is a cruiser that is going to, in all likeliness, handle the event content and things like that, the Cerberus is definitely one of them, because it can have that strong shield with missiles. Does it have drones? I think I've looked that up before as well, but let's take a quick look at this. Yeah, it actually has a couple of small drones for the smallest targets as well. So this is also a very strong PvE platform and used in PvP as well. And so as a result, it was able to command quite high prices, and yeah, the demand is there. There's a decently aggressive buying market happening here. After that, we've got the Guardian. That's a different story. Obviously, we've been going down for a couple of months now from 230 million. That was a tradable spike. Unfortunately, I didn't make my move. And now we are back on the downtrend. 175 million for the first seller, 185 for most, 167 million for the buyers. This is one that is showing that deflationary pressure, I would say. We're definitely at a much lower range than what we saw in the first half of the year. And at the moment, yeah, this is quite low on these buy prices. I think that the stealth bombers have been struggling as well. First part of the year here up until September, very nice, right? Super nice bottoms below 25 million. You know exactly when we're in that oversupply range, when you can pull the trigger, try to be aggressive. I think you could have bought close to 20 million in a lot of these, and then you have these spikes up to 35 million, 1, 2, 3, 4 of them. Very nice, very predictable, super nice for trading. But now here, right, we have this period where we have lower volatility. 25 million seems to be the new range, and then we dive down to 20 million. And so here now, this just may be our new range to look out for. 23 for the sellers, 21 for the first buyer, 20 million for the other. That's a decently narrow margin. And I think volumes are decent actually. So you could try to buy, but this is not enough for me. You would need to be able to go well below 20 million on the buyers before I make a move. Is that going to happen? Not very soon, I don't think, because 20 million for a stealth bomber is quite a good price. And so as a result, we are, I would say, in a difficult period when it comes to stealth bombers. Ikitursa, I think here this is gonna be an interesting story as well, I would say. For most of the year of the resource crunch, you could say the Triglavians have dominated the storyline, right? We had invasions all over the place, we had their new ships coming in, but we had a very nice cycle where we could join in the content, get the raw materials, make the ships, and so we managed to get the Ikitursa Tech 2 cruiser, very powerful, down to 400 million ISK, and then of course the Triglavians conquered their part of space. Bogven has been pulled out of high sec, and now I would say that Triglavian activity is down substantially. We shot back up to 700 million ISK, and we're actually at a 1 year high point of 789 for the sellers, 718 for the buyers, and one of the very rare places where you actually have a lot more demand than you have supply. It's gonna be in Triglavian stuff. They are very powerful, and at the moment it's very difficult to get the resources for them. Activity is down substantially, I would say, when it comes to Triglavian metrics, and this is something that we don't know, of course. What is CCP's goal for the Triglavians and the Edencom? For a long time, with all of the content that was available, it really looked like, you know, these are potentially maybe going to become like the next race, right? Perhaps even a player option for new players to jump into, get a Triglavian start or something like that, but those plans definitely seems to be on hold. If that was the case, you could of course have expected them to eventually try and make them as affordable and as doable as the base ships, you could say, of the existing 4 empires, and then Edencom being the counterpart of the Triglavians, you would perhaps expect those to do the same thing. But now it really, to me, looks like Triglavian ships, Triglavian modules, and the Edencom stuff is the premium stuff. super expensive, very difficult to get to. You have to train quite hard to grab those, and if you want to make this yourself, you're gonna have to interact with that rather unique type of content, and as a result, super expensive stuff. There's not even Tech 2 versions of Eden come, and all of this may just be paused for now. We don't really know what CCP's plans are with this, but this is definitely something that we haven't seen a lot in any of the other segments. A lot less supply than demand, and 1 year high points because of that. After that, we've got the Ishtar. That's quite the reverse situation, losing quite a few of its feathers. I think that's unfortunate. It's still, in my opinion, a great ship. Definitely has its place in high-tech exploration as one of the most versatile, able to do everything type of ships. 200 million for the sellers, 178 for the buyers. Definitely that move down to a lower range that is being shown here as well. Manticore, kind of the same thing, I would say, although I've always been a little bit more careful when it comes to the Manticore, because you can see here that the bottoms, it never really broke that 25 million mark, so it was always a little bit more difficult to say this is the time jumping on the Manticores, but then its potential up to 35, 37.5 did exist quite often. And then here we have this lowering of the volatility. We went to a new bottom here at below 22 million ISK, and this spike up, I mean, this was probably tradable, but felt very risky. 26 million for the sellers, 22.7 million for the buyers. And also something that's quite different, you usually have a decently stable and normal situation with a bit more supply than demand in the hounds, for instance. For the Manticore, it's different here again. So this one always felt like the odd one out. I've done a lot more and successful trades in the Hound and in the Nemesis than in the Manticore and the Purifier. Next up, we've got the Munin, again, right, 230 and above, a little bit below, and then our War Spike, pretty impressive, of course, but then you could have said, I thought this was oversupplied as we moved down to the 200 million, but this could already have been just, you know, the market predicting what was going to happen here, and we immediately just moved to that lower range, and that lower range is, well, below 200 million ISK. 186 for the sellers, 176 for the buyers. Then we've got our Nemesis with not the best, but I would say a reasonable first part of the year here, right? Bottom at 20 million, 27.5, then we go down below 25 million on quite a couple of occasions, obviously by opportunities, and then alright, it's not the 35 million, but it was predictable. 30 million double spike here, another 30 million, and another one, nice buy opportunity well below 25 million, and then here we have our last hurrah, I think, 30 million, down to 20, back up to 27.5. That was a very nice little trade. I think I grabbed like 4 Nemesis on this upswing here as well, but then we have this lowering, the price hikes don't go as high anymore. We again play with that 20 million low and a little bit more stability, much harder to trade in. At the moment, a Nemesis is going for 25 million, buyers are at 22 million. I think we're trying to find this new range, and it is very difficult to say what's the right price to pull the trigger on buy orders. The Oneros, a little bit of a surprise spike here at the tail end. I think we basically crashed down completely in availability because we went from 200 million down to the 150 million range. At the moment, it's 180 for the sellers, 163 for the buyers. That's actually doing quite okay in availability here as well. I do think that there is some dumping over these months. I always said you can definitely buy perhaps one Oneros, and I think it's not just because I say that there's people that had Oneroses ready to be sold, and then what we'll be seeing here is, of course, people trying to finally take that Oneros profit on those that they've bought for like 160 to 150 million. At the moment, you can definitely still do that, but that warning, I think, rings very true here. If you have to dump a dozen Oneroses now, you're gonna have a very bad time. If it's just one of them, sure, you're probably gonna make some profit on that. After that, we're keeping an eye on the Panther, but it's staying well above a billion ISK, so kind of confirming that, yeah, general deflation, general crashing of the Tech 2 market is definitely not happening. A billion ISK for the sellers, 950 for the buyers. And a quick anecdote from that Talking in Station episode that I was talking about the economic numbers for November. It's something that I'm considering here as well. At the moment, right, as a solo player, as a more veteran player that does have quite a bit of risk saved up in the bank. What would I invest in at the moment? Before all of this, right, it was pretty obvious. Dital is up and running. I need the fuels. So we had that cycle. We get our own structures, right? We get our own stuff to do. Now, as a more nomadic player at a much lower scale, an expensive Tech 2 battleship, perhaps for missioning or stuff like that. I'm looking at the Golem then myself. That could be the time for me to pull the trigger on this, because at the moment I don't have these fuel expenses. I easily made $500 million in a week exploring Minmatar space. It's been very, very lucrative. Actually, I'm kind of surprised. That was before the event. I've been focusing on that. I definitely want all of those battleship skins that you can earn there. But then you know, what are you going to invest your ISK in? And at the moment it would be expensive and fun toys like Tech 2 battleships, and that may just be keeping demand up, for instance, for the Panther. Then we get our Purifier. Again, you know, that first part here up to August, that's so good, right? You go down to close to 25 million, but you spike up to 37.5, almost 40 million, 35 million quite reliably. Lovely trade potential, 1, 2, 3, 4 times here. Again, in a matter of 8 months, this is really great. And then unfortunately we get that crash down to 20 million. That's nice, right? 20 to 30 million. That was one final hurrah. But then here at the tail end, that lowering of the range and that lowering of the volatility, where Tech 2 is trying to basically find its place in the current meta, and it's not easy. After that we get the Scimitar, most of the first part of the year again above 200 million, moving to that lower range below 200 million, 192 for the sellers, 178 for the buyers. Some of these logistics cruisers definitely suffering a lot on those buy prices, which creates that opportunity. But again, same warning, sometimes it will happen, like here with the Oneros, but you need patience and you need to not make too many investments in this, because selling it at that higher price is going to be very difficult. Then we get the Widow actually going up in price to above 1.1 billion, almost 1.2 for the sellers and well above $1 billion for the buyers, quite impressive. And then finally we get the Zealot, which is finally moving up a little bit from a 1 year low point below 180. It's now 195 for the sellers and 170 still for the buyers. This is basically the same story, I would say, as Scimitar, as Oneros. You could have one. Actually, I'm holding a Zealot that I bought at 187. But you know, don't buy a dozen of them hoping to do trades. The volumes just are not there. Now let me take a quick drink, because we've been going for almost an hour here. And then we'll move on to the Tech 3 market at 55.20. Like, that's kind of, I would say, insular from a lot of what's happening with the minerals, with Tech 1, with Tech 2. You can see that here starts the year a little bit below 40 million, ends the year at 40 million. Nice little couple of occasions here on volatility. Nullsec, I think, uses quite a few of these ships, and sometimes you will also have, like here, nice volume increase when CCP organizes a proving grounds. But overall, very nice and healthy market in the tactical destroyers. And at the moment, I think we're in, you know, an average normal spot. 40 million for the sellers, 36 million for the buyers. Here, these volumes are definitely not outlandish. Just a couple of sellers coming in the last 24 hours for 40 million ISK. Next up here we get the Hecate, that is still going at a premium, right, costing above 50 million or almost 50 million for the sellers, 46 million for the buyers. So a nice little premium on the Hecate compared to, for instance, the Confessor, but that's immediately translated in a little bit more supply as well. 33 here, 21 here, another 30 here. So all of that, I think at the moment we don't have enough supply to really push the price back down, but eventually you can expect the Hecate to keep this oversupply up and then to narrow that margin quite substantially with the Confessor. And after that we get the Jackdaw, that's just above 40 million, so the Confessor may actually move up a little bit if that lack of supply comes in, and they'll meet each other, I would say, a little bit above 40 million in the range of the Jackdaw. that's currently going for 42 million. Buyers are at 38 million, kind of narrow margin. And this one has this one problem, 267 of them, 66 days to go. That is also keeping things in check, and basically is going to say, you know, we're not going to make too many jackdaws, we're going to make Hecates. We still have that premium. But is also, I think, going to keep everything nice and stable above that 40 million ISK range. And then we've got our one Zvepel here that's back down below 40 million, but that's to be expected for what's at the moment the least popular tactical destroyer. 40 million still for the sellers, 35 million for the buyers, so a little bit less demand. And then supply-wise, we get a little bit more, but that's also normal considering that we just recovered from a spike up to 50 million ISK. And I would say the reason is this is the proving grounds period. You can see that we don't have as big a spike. We have one in Hecate, but you know, it's definitely not as pronounced as what happened with the Zvepel, and that is because the Zvepel was actually in a great cheap place. You could buy these for like 33 million, I want to say, before all of this, and so the accessibility all of a sudden made the Zvepel very popular, and that also meant that that's where you could get your profit. You could all of a sudden sell them for 50 million ISK, and all of this is stabilizing very quickly. With still 40 million for the sales, which is quite reasonable, but you can also see that the volumes are dying down and becoming quite reasonable. But I would say you can expect a bit more pressure on this Zvepel for the sellers, right? We definitely have room to go down to the 38 million range for the sellers. It is the least popular one, and then the Hecate is eventually going to fill up as well. With Confessor, Jackdaw, 42 million, probably seller side, able to then finally get a little bit more supply in as well. But across the board, the tactical destroyer markets, you can see this on this 1 year chart for almost everything, very stable, well supplied, able to maintain its value very easily. I think it shows how great these ships are. All of these, you know, especially I love the Jackdaw for PvE myself. I think the Hecate got that nice little boost because of the brawler change that came in at some point, giving a massive boost to its potential at super close range. And then the Confessor is just great all around as well. Zvepel is a little bit of the oddball out, but that just translates in slightly lower average prices for the year. But across the board, this is a great ship, useful almost anywhere, with nullsec usage as well, and so you've got this maintaining of the value across the board, despite everything that's happened with money supply, with base economy, Tech 1 and things like that. Here, nice and stable, which could be a sign that, well, if this is what CCP was kind of looking for, we want to increase the value of activity, of mining, make all of that stuff harder, but we don't want to create a massive inflationary spiral or anything like that in the economy. They may just have hit it pretty well, I would say, if we look at the tactical destroyer market. We still have to take a look at the cruiser as well. Here is the Legion, back up to 180 million pretty much for the sellers, 177 there and 156 for the buyers. Very different story for me personally when it comes to the cruisers. Why? Because the availability tends to be kind of crazy. We actually have high prices with a lot of availability, so people are trying to sell their Legions at a profit at the moment, but we actually come from low price of like 150 and even below that at next to no availability. And so at least when we had like lower prices in some of these tactical destroyers, it was because we could see oversupply. We could see 40, 50s quite often on these sell orders. Here you have this very strange situation, no Legions available and selling for less than 140. And now here we're going back up, and all of a sudden the supply comes online, of course, which is normal. I also bought a Legion, and so I could try to dump that, and you get 10s and 20s right here. So a decent amount of supply at these higher prices, but that it can crash down on such low supplies, that's what's kind of crazy. The Loki had the same thing a little bit, right? Went from 150 up to 200 million, is now in the middle at the 180 range. 178 also for the sellers, 166 for the buyers, and availability, you can see that right here, is quite good. And then down here, you know, it drops off very quickly. So it's super strange here. After that, we get a Proteus doing a triple spike back up to 180 million, 184 for the sellers, 168 for the buyers. Here, at least, this makes more sense. A lack of availability is increasing the price. So if, like, you bought some, well, a couple months ago close to 130, you can again try to take your 50 million ISK in profit at the moment for the Proteus. And yeah, while the Loki is under pressure, while the Legion is under pressure a little bit, well, actually also, yeah, another spike there. Let's take a look at the Tengu then. This one is sliding down from its spike about a month ago, went up to almost 200 million, now at 171 and 158 for the buyers. I would say that the cruiser market is much more gamble territory because of these kind of reverse supply price signal situations that I'm seeing there, but that doesn't mean you can't do anything here. I would just give that warning: stick to one. Always stick to one chip here, because it is, in my opinion, going to be very difficult to actually materialize the trades here, get that best sell price. It's going to be very difficult, whereas yeah, for I think it was the Confessor actually made at least one trade with like 4 or 5 ships or something like that. And it was actually quite doable with bigger volumes there. So that's the difference. This is far more predictable in the destroyer market, and I think in the cruiser market you're gambling, which you can clearly see can pay off from time to time, right? I'm still holding on to my Legion, which I bought at 135, but I could make a massive profit here. I'm actually going to hold on to both of these because I'm training for flying the Legion and flying the Loki. It's that other expensive toy thing. What the hell am I going to invest my ISK in at the moment? It's probably going to be one of those. But there is the potential trade that can be done in the cruiser market. It just feels like it's a lot more risky. And then finally we have the extra product for the week coming in at 103.40. All right. Another pretty long one, but yeah, kind of a request. In fact, I'm reading it a little bit as a request. It's going to be ice products. And the request was basically, where's ice? Well, we've already been going for an hour. I think that here we get a pretty nice baseline part of products, and so I do take a look at this as the extra product. That's where I try to rotate between everything else, so that we can take a look at faction ships, at salvage, at ice products, at fuels, at everything else. But the EVE market is so vast. There's so much stuff. I think you could do, I don't know, maybe like a 10-hour show if you would cover absolutely everything. So for today, it's the ice products. Here is heavy water, definitely a pretty sharp decline here as well. Start the year at 200 ISK, is currently going for 73 for the sellers, 65 for the buyers, so still under pressure, although here the volumes are starting to be pretty damn big. Helium isotopes, a reverse situation, actually went up in value, went up to 900 ISK, is actually now converging or settling at around 700 at the moment, 720 almost for the sellers, 692 for the buyers. That's pretty good, I'd say, for the average. Hydrogen isotopes also double spike up to 800 throughout the year, starts at 500, ends at 700. Then we get liquid ozone, a non-isotope, again losing a lot of value here, currently selling for 150. Buyers coming in at 140. Nitrogen isotopes, that's kind of impressive. Started at 500, just a straight move up in October to 1000 ISK and able to defend that range. Nitrogen isotopes selling for 1000 ISK. Oxygen isotopes, same pattern here, right? Starts at 550, ends up at 800 ISK. Very nice gains here as well. 850 for the sellers, 800 for the buyers. And then strontium actually doing quite okay as well, from 3000 to 4000 ISK. So we get heavy water and liquid ozone that have lost a lot of its value, but isotopes have definitely gained in value over the last year. And then strontium also actually a third of the price increased, not so bad. And so ice, pretty valuable. I would say it's also something to consider if you can find it. It's become even harder now to find ice to mine in EVE Online, but apparently decently lucrative across the board, and this while fuel prices are actually down quite a lot. So I would say that this is also another sign that producing fuels is not necessarily a lot cheaper, but the consumption is down quite substantially because of the changes to structures. And that's going to be it for this week, guys. Thank you very much for watching, and as always, I'll see you next time.